Today, we are going to discuss about the enzyme inhibitors and the different types of enzyme inhibitors. Now, what is enzyme inhibitors? Enzyme inhibitors भनेको के हो त? Any substances that can decrease or lowers the velocity of enzyme reaction is called inhibitors. These inhibitors can block the binding site of enzyme. Moreover, it can also inhibit catalytic activity of enzyme. अब enzyme को यो binding site मा कसरी block गर्छ त inhibitors ले? यसको थुप्रै तरिकाहरू छ. enzyme reaction कसरी हुन्छ त पहिला सुरु त्यो बुझौं है त. enzyme को active site लाई हामीले binding site पनि भनेर भन्छौं र यो binding site मा जब substrate आएर bind हुन्छ तब त्यसले enzyme substrate complex बनाउँछ र प्रोडक्ट फर्म गर्छ र यसलाई नै हामीले enzyme substrate complex भनेर भनिन्छ. तर यदि यो enzyme को एक्टिभ साइट र बाइन्डिङ साइटमा सबस्ट्रेट आएर बाइन्ड हुनुको सट्टा इन्हिबिटर्स आएर बाइन्ड हुन्छ भने त्यसले enzyme inhibitors कम्प्लेक्स बनाउँछ र प्रोडक्ट फर्म गर्न दिदैन र सबस्ट्रेट त्यसमा आएर बाइन्ड हुन पनि पाउँदैन. अर्को भनेको enzyme को बाइन्डिङ साइटमा इन्हिबिटर्स आएर बाइन्ड हुनुको सट्टा त्यो अर्को साइटले enzyme को अर्को साइट भनेको एलोस्टेरिक साइट भनेर भनिन्छ. यो एलोस्टेरिक साइटमा गएर इन्हिबिटर्स गएर बाइन्ड हुन्छ. enzyme को बाइन्डिङ साइटको र एक्टिभ साइटको स्पेस र स्ट्रक्चर चेन्ज हुन्छ र सबस्ट्रेट आएर त्यहाँनिर फिट हुन पाउँदैन. त्यसले गर्दा पनि enzyme को चाहिँ बाइन्डिङ साइट ब्लक हुन सक्छ. अब हामी enzyme inhibitors को क्लासेस र टाइप्स मा जान्छौं. Enzyme inhibitors are divided into two general classes. First one is reversible inhibitors. Second one is irreversible inhibitors. Reversible inhibitors भनेको के हो त र irreversible inhibitors भनेको के हो त? What are the differences between reversible inhibitors and irreversible inhibitors? Reversible inhibitors bind to the enzyme through non-covalent bonds, whereas irreversible inhibitors bind to the enzyme through covalent bonds. Reversible inhibitors are further divided into three different types. Similarly, irreversible inhibitors are further divided into three different types. First मा हामी reversible inhibitors मा जाम. Reversible inhibitors भनेको के हो त? हामी अघि पनि भनिसक्यौ रिभर्सिबल इन्हिबिटर्स यदि हामीले इन्जाइममा राख्यौं भने इन्जाइमको एक्टिभ साइटमा अर बाइन्डिङ साइटमा गएर त्यो इन्हिबिटर्स बाइन्ड हुन्छ र त्यसले इन्जाइम इन्हिबिटर कम्प्लेक्स बनाउँछ. यसलाई नै हामीले रिभर्सिबल इन्हिबिटर्स भन्छौं. तर यदि इन्जाइमको बाइन्डिङ साइटमा भएको र इन्जाइममा भएको इन्हिबिटर्सलाई हामीले निकाल्यौं भने त्यहाँबाट रिमुभ गर्यौं भने त्यसबाट फेरि पनि इन्जाइम चाहिँ फुल्ली रिस्ट्रक्चर चाहिँ हुन्छ. यो चाहिँ हामीले बुझ्नुपर्ने कुरा छ. नाउ रिभर्सिबल इन्हिबिटर्स आर फर्दर डिवाइडेड इन्टु थ्री डिफरेंट टाइप्स. फर्स्ट one is competitive inhibitors or competitive inhibition. Second one is non-competitive inhibitors or non-competitive inhibition. And third one is uncompetitive inhibitors or uncompetitive inhibition. Now, what are the differences between competitive inhibition and non-competitive inhibition? Competitive inhibition भनेको के हो त? Competition occurs between substrate and inhibitors, whereas in non-competitive inhibition, no competition occurs between substrate and inhibitors. In competitive inhibition, inhibitors structure are similar to the substrate, whereas in non-competitive inhibition, inhibitors structure are not similar. In competitive inhibition, inhibitors bind to the active site of the enzyme and form enzyme inhibitory complex rather than enzyme substrate complex, whereas in non-competitive inhibition, inhibitors bind to the site of the enzyme other than active site or binding site of the enzyme, that is एलोस्टेरिक साइट। कम्पिटेटिभ इन्हिबिसनमा के हुन्छ भने इन्जाइमको एक्टिभ साइट अर्थात् बाइन्डिङ साइटमा इन्हिबिटर्स आएर बाइन्ड हुन्छ र त्यसले इन्जाइम इन्हिबिटर्स कम्प्लेक्स बनाउँछ र त्यसले प्रोडक्ट फर्म गर्दैन। तर नन कम्पिटेटिभ इन्हिबिसनमा के हुन्छ भने इन्जाइमको एक्टिभ साइट अर्थात् बाइन्डिङ साइटमा इन्हिबिटर्स आएर बाइन्ड हुँदैन, तर कहाँ बाइन्ड हुन्छ भने इन्जाइमको एउटा अर्को साइट हुन्छ जसलाई हामीले एलोस्टेरिक साइट भनेर भनिन्छ। यो एलोस्टेरिक साइटमा गएर इन्हिबिटर्स गएर बाइन्ड हुन्छ, त्यसले गर्दाखेरि यो एक्टिभ साइटको स्ट्रक्चर र सेप चाहिँ थोरै चेन्ज हुन्छ, जसको कारणले गर्दाखेरि सबस्ट्रेट आएर बाइन्ड हुन पाउँदैन। त्यसलाई नै हामीले नन कम्पिटेटिभ इन्हिबिसन भनेर भन्छौँ र यसमा चाहिँ सबस्ट्रेट र इन्हिबिसनको कम्पिटिसन हुँदैन। इन कम्पिटेटिभ इन्हिबिसन it can be overcome by increasing the substrate concentration, whereas in non-competitive inhibition it cannot be overcome by increasing the substrate concentration. Competitive inhibition को enzyme kinetics कस्तो हुन्छ त? Competitive inhibition मा Vmax सेम हुन्छ र Km increase हुन्छ भने non-competitive inhibition मा Vmax decrease हुन्छ। Now, what is uncompetitive inhibition or uncompetitive inhibitors? Inhibitors and substrate bind to the same site, that is active site. यसलाई नै हामीले uncompetitive inhibition भनेर भन्छौं। And it cannot be overcome by the addition of the more substrate. हामीले substrate concentration या substrate धेरै बढायो भने पनि यसलाई हामीले ओभरकम गर्न सक्दैनौं। Irreversible inhibitors are further divided into three types. First one is reactive substrate analog or affinity labels. Second one is group specific inhibitors, and third one is suicide based or mechanism based inactivation inhibitors. Now I am going to conclude this topic. Enzyme inhibitors are divided into two classes. First one is reversible inhibitors and second one is irreversible inhibitors. Reversible inhibitors are further divided into three types. First one is competitive inhibition or competitive inhibitors. Second one is non-competitive inhibition or non-competitive inhibitors. Third one is uncompetitive inhibition or uncompetitive inhibitors. Whereas irreversible inhibitors are further divided into three types. First one is reactive substrate analog or affinity labels. Second one is group specific inhibitors, and third one is suicide inhibitors or suicide based inhibitors or mechanism based inactivation inhibitors. Thank you for watching.